Hi everybody, today we're going to talk a little yoga philosophy and we are going to connect the first yama and the first niyama. If you aren't familiar with either of those things, that is okay. The yamas and niyamas are a set of guidelines that exist in yogic philosophy, and they offer us guidance for our interactions with others, with the environment around us, and also with ourselves. So the first yama is ahimsa, or nonviolence, doing no harm. And today we're going to focus most specifically on how that can translate to how we interact with ourselves. So doing no harm is exactly as it sounds, doing no harm in thought, in words, or in action. And if we can interact with ourselves in that way as much as possible, then hopefully we're going to live a more joyful experience and we're going to be able to grow as much as possible. Self-talk is a buzzword. It's something that we're more aware of now, maybe, than we have been in the past. And it's incredibly important. And basically what self-talk is it's that little running dialogue that is constantly going in your mind. And when it comes to not doing any harm or doing as little harm with our self-talk as possible, there are a couple things that we need to do. First, we have to become aware of our self-talk. What are we saying to ourselves and when are we saying those things? And that's going to help us establish different patterns with that self-talk. So you have to become aware, and then we have to gather information and decide whether or not our self-talk is serving us. And when it's not serving us, then we get the opportunity to let that self-talk go, to maybe do some thought stopping, to try and reframe. There are several tools that we can do after the fact. But the first thing is we have to become aware of the self-talk and what we're saying to ourselves. Now, I was thinking about this idea of negative self-talk versus positive self-talk and how it can hold us back at times. And I thought about this scenario of being in an interview. One of the questions that gets asked in an interview is, what do you think one of your weaknesses is? And I know that in an interview, I have said before that my biggest weakness is that I'm really hard on myself. And I believe there are a couple reasons why I was willing to share that. First, it's true, but beyond that, I was willing to share that as a weakness because I didn't think it was something that was going to be a deal breaker. I didn't think that it was something that was going to be a red flag that wasn't going to allow me to get the job. And in a way, I thought it was a weakness that I could share that could be perceived as something that actually the employer wanted on one level or another. I did this subconsciously. I really wasn't thinking about it then, but I'm thinking about it now. So when I said that I'm really hard on myself and that's a weakness, what I'm hoping I'm also saying is that I have really high standards for the work that I produce, and I'm incredibly hardworking. So a product of that is me being hard on myself in an effort to maintain my high standards. So this might be true. It might be true that I have very high standards for myself and I'm hardworking. And maybe the potential employer thought the same thing because of what I was willing to share. But the interesting part here is that by being willing to share this about myself, I am demonstrating that it is a socially accepted norm to have negative self-talk that is hard on oneself when you fail or something doesn't work out or something isn't up to your standard. Otherwise, I wouldn't be willing to share it. So that's the information that I want to get through, because self-talk is spoken about more now than ever before. But we still have a lot of barriers in the way to actually improving our self-talk because it is socially accepted to have negative self-talk. So then we might think, how can I separate holding myself accountable, having high standards, and still not causing any harm with my self-talk? And that's a fine line to walk. we can't use the need for positive self-talk to ignore information. Information about performance, information about feedback, information about outcome. We can't ignore those things, but what we don't have to do is we don't have to assign information a positive or negative connotation. All we have to do is take in the information and then decide how to proceed. This is a lot harder in practice than it is just saying. But if we can allow ourselves to take in information, understand and recognize whether whatever it is up to our standard, then we can move forward without holding ourselves back. And that's the key. We want to be able to have a dialogue that's going on in our head that is serving us and is allowing us to grow, is gathering the information that we are receiving from the outside world, from inside of ourselves, and use that information to continue to grow. This is where Saucha comes in, which is the first niyama. And the first niyama, it basically means purity or cleanliness. And in yoga, it's talking about purity of body, purity of mind. And we're going to stick with that purity of mind concept here. And so when I say purity or clean, what are some things that come to mind? For me, I think quality, and I think high standard. Whether if it's for instance, if it's a nutritional supplement and it is tested and it is shown to be pure of substance and it has clean ingredients, then that's going to mean that it's quality product and it is being held to a really high standard. I think we can do the same thing with how we interact with ourselves. Being non-harming with ourselves doesn't have to reduce the standard to which we're holding ourselves at all. In fact, maybe it's actually elevating it. Maybe it is holding our relationship and how we interact with ourselves to a pure standard that becomes in line with this idea of Saucha, because it is non-harming, because we are choosing to interact with ourselves in a way that is not harming, even when we experience failure or setbacks or loss or rejection, any of those things that can cause anybody to kind of react back and look at the self and think, what am I doing? So I'll leave you with a song lyric. And this song was playing the other day, and it's been a long time since I've heard it, but it's a Jack Johnson song from one of his first albums. And the lyric says, "Sometimes he thinks that he's on his way, but I can see that his brake lights are on." When we insist on using negative self-talk or internal shame or guilt to maintain the standard with which we are working or experiencing this world, then we might think that we're moving forward and we might think that we're growing, and maybe we are a little bit, but we've actually got one foot on the brake. So I hope that this inspires you to recognize where you might be braking and where you might be able to let off a little bit. Thank you so much for joining me.